All right, I wanted to narrate a real-time recording of how I painted a woman sipping a glass of wine. And I'm doing it in real time. I think sometimes when you do a time lapse, it's not always explained everything how things are done. And also, when you do time lapse without showing the screen and my hand and the pen and all that other stuff that happens on this side of the camera, it also goes some questions go unanswered. So this is what I want to show you how I did. This is a painting of a woman drinking wine, and I did it on my iPad. I did it using the app called Procreate. And I'm going to show you how I did it, and it's in real time. I think it's about a half hour long. So I'm going to turn off this recorder and turn on the other thing, this, so I can narrate it, okay? And I don't know. I mean, some of you have written me and asked me how you do digital art. Well, there's more than one answer to that question. So the key word in the question, how do you do digital art? The key word is the word you, so me. So I'm only showing you how I do it, and also what I like. I like to do paintings that look like paintings digitally, but using an iPad instead of a canvas and tubes of paint. That's enough said. I'm going to turn this off and flip it over to the recording I made earlier of that painting I just showed you. Okay? All right, here we go.
All right. Well, there's the screen. It's blank. That's the Procreate. Well, that's the iPad actually, with Procreate open to a blank white canvas. In this case, I chose to have 16 by 20. I do them large so that later on I can make them smaller, because if you start small and make them larger, it usually gets pixelated. Here I'm choosing the brush. The brush I chose for the entire painting is called Turpentine, and there it is right there. Um, that screen that just popped up was a way for you to customize the way the brush looks. I didn't change it at all. It's the way the factory settings are. One thing I need to tell you is that when I did this, there was a reference photo I was using. It was on my computer screen, but it's a photo of a woman drinking wine. Okay, so I decided to paint her. The color I chose, I will try to explain this. I used that thing right there, and there's two of them that you can use on there. One is round. You might use the color wheel, for example, and I prefer this one, the square one, and then I just kind of pick my colors. In traditional paint, obviously, you would have your tubes of paint, and you would have your paint on your palette, and you would be mixing the colors so that the colors you chose are accurate to what you want to represent. Right now, it looks like a child's drawing, doesn't it? It looks like something a child would draw, a face with hair on it. And in a way, I guess that's how I paint. I don't paint in lines. Now, that right there looks like a line, and I guess to say I don't paint in lines is, as a blanket statement, isn't true, because there are obviously some lines that you paint. But for the most part, I try to paint in such a way so that painting is done in large areas and in shapes. And I've never flown an airplane, but I have heard that a pilot is constantly correcting as he flies. The plane is constantly going the wrong way, and you're constantly correcting. In a way, that's like driving a car too. The car you're constantly correcting so you stay on the road. Well, the same thing with painting. Whether it's traditional on a canvas or a piece of paper or some other surface, or if it's digital. Okay, so now let me explain what I'm doing here. I'm changing the canvas color. I didn't like it being stark white. I thought it should have a little bit of darkness to it, so I changed that. Now there's two controls on the left. The top one makes the point of the pen or the brush larger and smaller. The bottom one changes the opacity of it. So in the real world, in real paint, you might say you're thinning the paint a little bit when you move it down. So that's one of the things I like about digital. One of the things that I also like about digital is doing things. See there? That's changing the opacity. I was not happy apparently with the opacity, so I changed it a little bit. I am constantly going back to my analogy of a pilot. I'm constantly correcting mistakes. Put something in the wrong place, made something too big, made something too small, made something too dark or too light, and in the course of doing this, you will see that I'm constantly correcting lights and darks and shapes and sizes. I do use digital tricks. Let me explain what a digital trick would be. A digital trick would be, for example, how do I explain this? A digital trick would be, for example, like lassoing part of the picture and making it larger. For example, let's say I made the eyes too small. I think I do one digital trick in this. Yes, with the hand. Yes, I do. So good. You'll be able to see that example. I didn't do too many. I have no problem with digital tricks. In fact, calling it a trick is kind of unfair. It's a digital tool. And just like any tool, it's new to the world because it's digital. Well, relatively new. If you're 20 years old, it doesn't seem new. It's been around a long time for you. But for us older guys who work traditionally with paint and pastel and pencil and the different types of paint, for us the digital things seem like a shortcut, seem like cheating maybe. But you know what? The end result is you want a nice picture, regardless of how you do it. In my case, I like to do the paintings that look painterly. Again, I'm old school. Maybe I just like paintings that look like they're made with paint. I know sometimes people do paintings and they look like photographs, and actually some of mine look like photographs on a phone. This is another thing about today's world. You do a picture 16 by 20, you put it on Facebook, and it's 1 inch across, and so because it's shrunk so much, it kind of looks like a photograph. But it's the world we live in. So here I'm painting the glass. The glass in the reference photo was probably not this blue-green, not this green. It was probably the light that was coming through. It's probably a clear glass, but just the light that was shining through it was giving the impression of a little hint of green, a little hint of blue, and I may have gone overboard with it in choosing my colors. I think I corrected that a little bit later on, but I didn't worry about it because ultimately it's the composition. It's the entire picture that you are trying to work. Again, it's like flying an airplane, correcting the mistakes along the way, and ultimately you want to get to your destination. So the destination for me was to have a painterly painting of a woman drinking a glass of wine. And so that's what we're doing here. The woman's clothing, she's got a black jacket on, and she's got a blue, I don't know what you call those things that just wrap around you, but I like the idea that the light was coming down on her and lighting the top of her hair on her left side, our right side, and also the top of the garment, and how the shadow falls on her neck and how the light reflects off of the glass. So in traditional paint, sometimes, not always, but sometimes you paint the lights and the reflections and things like that later, and you just paint in the the local colors, if you will. Local colors meaning, like if it's a red wagon, you paint the red, and then later on you paint the reflections in the metal and the shadows on the sides of it, all that. So, but not always. And in fact, I've watched artists do it both ways. For me, I typically go right for it. I don't normally say I'm going to go back to it and change it. So, and I do the same thing with the digital art. Those little circles and things on the right side, I was using a program to record. I don't remember what it was called, but that's what that is. I guess I could have cropped that out of here. But anyway, so here is me painting in her jacket. Now, I did not worry about the lights and the darks of the jacket. It was a black jacket, and I thought, well, I'm just going to keep it black. I don't need to put any shadows. In a garment, typically what really pops, what really makes a garment look wonderful, is when you do have lights and darks and shadows, and you can show the folds in the fabric. In this particular case, I chose not to because it wasn't necessary for this picture. The hand. Okay, I'm working on the hand right now. The hand is on a separate layer. Now, that's a digital trick. The reason I did that was because I thought if I mess it up, if I make it too large or too small, I can adjust that layer and adjust the hand by itself without having to worry about the rest of the painting. Again, in traditional painting, if you made that same mistake, you would have to just paint over it. And I do paint over it later on in this demonstration, you'll see. And by the way, there you go. Now that's a digital trick. See what I did? I shrunk it. See, it was a little bit too big, and I thought it needs to be smaller, the hand. And so that was a digital trick right there. I think that might be the only. Well, it's not the only digital trick, because later on you'll see that I turn the whole canvas so that it's more of a portrait instead of a landscape. And that's the trick. Oh, right there. See where I push my finger onto the surface of the iPad, and then a circle forms. Well, what that's doing is it's taking the color that's already on the canvas, already on the iPad, and it's making it available to me to use as a color. Here we go. See right there? And the reason I do that is because I had already picked the color with the color picker up at the upper top right, whatever. And so I didn't need to re-find it. It was already there, so all I had to do was push my finger. This is another way to do it, by the way. That little circle, or little square on the left side, that little tiny square. I think you can use that. I never use it though. So there's another thing I want to tell you. If I've used it in here already, I'm not sure. When you want to undo something, you did something you don't like. I'm sure if you've used computers enough, you know about the undo feature. There's more than one way to undo on Procreate. I use the 2-finger method, and I think it's 2 fingers to undo. Well, it is 2 fingers to undo, and I think it's 3 fingers to redo. So I use them, but I don't think I used it that much on this particular painting. The idea that this is a demonstration was clear to me from the beginning, and so the time it took me to make this is very, very short. I'm going to tell you that a half hour to do a painting is unusual, and the end painting may not be as great as I wanted it to be, but I did this as a demonstration so you can see kind of how I do the paintings, especially the painterly look of the paintings. Yeah, a digital painting, the way I like to do them, can be 5 hours. I've done some that were 8 hours. If you ask Robin, she'll see me sitting in my recliner. I love my recliner. She'll see me sitting on my recliner while we watch like a double header. Like we'll watch two movies. I'm not really watching it, by the way. I'm usually listening to the movie. That's why I like movies with dialogue, so I can listen to them. But yeah, so I will sit there to two movies. That's 4 hours, right? About, and then I'm up the next morning working on it still. So I just wanted to point out that I don't do all paintings in a half hour. This is clearly a demonstration, just so you could get a grasp. I think Procreate is just a wonderful program. I hope it gets the respect it deserves. It is really an outstanding program. You end up with some wonderful files, wonderful artwork. You can save them as JPEGs, as PNGs with a transparent background if you want. I believe you can save them as TIFFs and PDFs, and I'm not sure all the different file types. All right, so getting back to the painting, I am not happy with that hand. However, I know I'm not happy with it, and I know I'm going to come back to it. You'll see in a little while that I enlarge everything, and the way you do that is the way you do enlarging on your phone. Is, you take two fingers and you spread your fingers, and the picture becomes larger. So I'll do that in just a little while. You'll see how I refine the look of the face, how I refine the look of the fingers, and other details I can't remember all that I did. So we're 16 minutes into a 36-minute video. I have the benefit of having those numbers in front of me right now. So we're almost halfway through. And again, this is a demonstration. If you think about the fact that the brush I'm using is called a brush, and yet you look at what I'm holding and it looks more like a pen or a pencil. By the way, that's an Apple Pencil, just so you know. I think it's the only kind you can use with Procreate, although you can use your finger. And you know what? I think I'm wrong. I think you can use another different stylus. I'm not really sure. But my point I wanted to make was that it's called a brush, even though you're using a stylus or a pencil. It behaves as a brush. There's a learning curve that I wanted to get to here. The learning curve is to how to use something that feels like a pencil so that it behaves like a brush. That took a little bit of doing. And you want to know something? There's no shortcut. You just use it. Just take it out and paint and paint and paint and paint and paint. And after a while you say, this is exactly like I would do with a paintbrush. You got to admit, though, it's quicker. You're not mixing colors. You're not worrying about thinner. You're not worrying about cleaner. You're not worrying about drying times. You're not worried about you do have to worry about smudging when you paint over things, because that does happen as it does in real paint. And of course, as in real paint, you use that. You use the fact that you smudge. You want to smudge. Right here now, I'm using an eraser. I wanted the eraser to also be a turpentine eraser, so it would be the same look as the brush. The reason I had the eraser, I felt like I made her hair too big on that side of her head, so I'm cutting her hair with the turpentine eraser. This is another thing also with the Procreate. Look in the upper right part of the Procreate of the iPad screen. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. So the second thing from the right that I just clicked, now there's the first thing. That's the color. The second thing is the layers. So you can pick which layer you're painting on. The third thing from the right, that's the eraser. The fourth thing from the right, you can't tell from looking at it probably, but it's a finger, and it does what a finger would do on a painting, is it smudges. And then the fifth thing from the right is the brush itself. Now, you can make every one of those things, you can make the eraser, the smudge tool, and the brush, I should say. You can make them all the same. So if you're smudging something that you've done in ink, you can make the smudge guy an ink, the smudge tool an ink tool. I like it to be the same. You don't have to. You can make the eraser an airbrush eraser and just go for it. Just erase large things. And I do that sometimes also. So there's a couple things I do with the Procreate. I do illustrations and I do art. In my mind, there is a big difference between illustration and art. In my world, an illustration would be something I do for a children's book. And a piece of art is, a landscape. I don't do very many portraits. I just chose this because I wanted to demonstrate. A lot of people like to do portraits. So the girl in the actual photo, I don't think I captured her likeness completely, but I wasn't really trying to. And when you do portraits and they have to look like the person you're painting, you really have to focus, and you really have to use that correct thing. You have to constantly correct, whether it's real paint or digital paint. It's a constant correction. But in this case, I wasn't going for a likeness. I wasn't trying to make the painting look like the girl in the photograph. I just wanted it to look like a woman drinking wine. It could be any woman out there. So here now I am I'm not really doing lines. I'm doing like small, short little brush strokes. In the reference photo, the woman's eyes were just a tiny bit open and kind of looking sly. I don't have the expression yet, but I did achieve it. You'll see in just a bit. And that takes a little bit of doing too. It's again trial and error. See how I just changed the shape of the size of the brush, adding the darks in the corners and in the areas where shadow would be falling. And let's see what I do here. Making a little bit more rouge, a little bit more red to her skin tone. When I paint traditionally, I've done in my life, by the way, a lot of traditional painting, and a lot of the traditional painting I've done has been with pastel and acrylic and also some oil, and they all behave differently, and the one thing they all have in common is that you have to constantly correct mistakes, constantly reevaluate what you've done and say, do I like that? Do I not like that? And constantly pay attention to light and dark, and constantly pay attention to size and shape. So it's the same thing with digital. You can see I did enlarge the area. I did expand it so that I could more accurately paint in her eyes. Right now, her eyes look closed. It just took a little bit of extra paint to make them look like they were open slightly, and maybe looking at the glass. And also, you can see a tiny bit of paint changes her mouth from questionable, what it looked like, I don't know, but to a slight smirk, a slight smile, a slight sense of being happy and being and enjoying the glass of wine. Got about 10 minutes, 12 minutes left of this, and I'm constantly picking new colors. Like you can see right here, I'm trying to add a little bit of red to her hair, mostly because of the shadows and the brush strokes, so that it looks like hair and not like one big blob of color. Sometimes you want a color to be less saturated. In traditional paint, you would add a complementary color to it. To do that, you would add a tiny bit of green, for example, to desaturate a red. You'd add a tiny bit of red to desaturate a green. You'd add a tiny bit of yellow to desaturate a blue, etc. And or orange, whatever works. But in digital, to desaturate it, you just go to that palette that is provided in digital. And just pick the color. All right, so here I am changing the size of the brush. I'm probably going to do, this is where I start to make her eyes look like they're looking down at the glass. And it's a couple of the fine lines around the eye. There you go. Now, you see that? Now it's suddenly, all of a sudden, her eyes look like they're slightly open, and they're looking at that glass. Or they're looking past the glass, maybe. All of a sudden, right? You see it? Now I took a sample of the skin tone right there so that I could change it slightly and then use it somewhere on her cheek. Okay. And again, I'm constantly changing the size, constantly changing the opacity, and constantly reevaluating what it looks like. My eyes are shifting back and forth from the painting I'm doing up to the reference photo that I'm using to paint from. And if you pay attention to, you don't have to do this. What's kind of cool about paintings is you can leave them as loose as you want. This is relatively loose because, as I mentioned, it's only a half hour worth of work. If I had kept working on this, sometimes when you keep working on something, you prefer it the way it looked earlier. That happens too. Sometimes it's good with digital paint. Here's something you can do with digital: is you can predict that you might not be happy if you go further. So what you do is you duplicate the whole file, and then you keep one aside in case you want to go back to what you started or what you had earlier, and then you can change the new one. All right, now here I enlarged the hand because I knew that the hand needed to be fixed. So rather than erasing anything, I'm just going to paint. This would be the way you would do it traditionally. Just paint the areas of that you just painted over. Like in this case, I'm painting the colors that are reflected in the glass, that are refracted actually through the glass, so that her finger is more slender and is more of an accurate shape for what a finger actually looks like. I didn't worry about putting the fingernails in. I didn't see that it was necessary. Again, if I was going for the 8-hour painting, I might do things like that. The problem is, working that long, sometimes a painting ends up looking like a photograph. And there's probably a debate in these words here, but sometimes, I don't know, I think sometimes a photograph, we have photographs. I mean, photography is out there, and it's an art form in and of itself. And prior to there being cameras and photographs, artists, basically their role in life was to provide pictures for rich people. If you think about it, the artists usually weren't rich. They might have made money from their art, but usually they were painting royalty and world leaders and things like that. So those people wanted something looking as real as possible. In today's world, we have photography that can do that. Like I say, photography is an art itself. So that opens up art to this wonderful opportunity to not need to necessarily recreate something photographically, but rather in an artistic way. You might say a loose way. You might say an impressionistic way. Even in real paint, I like to do impressionism. I like to do pointillism with lots of dots or painted dots, or kind of a blend of the two. And it's a nice thing to be able to do that. By the way, when I've watched some videos of other artists, and they'll be outside, they'll be doing plein air painting, and they'll have passersby who, ooh and ah, and are very impressed with what the artist is doing. And every once in a while, there'll be a know-it-all, if you know what I mean. And the know-it-all that comes to mind was a guy who told an artist on the streets of New York who was doing a painting of a street scene in Impressionism. And the artist, the man on the street told the artist, he said, you're not doing anything new. That's been done before. Impressionism is dead. You have to come up with something new. So, I mean, it must have hurt the guy's feelings probably, because he's painting, and you know what? You have to earn a living. Let me tell you something. You can't just like do stuff and say, well, I'm just doing it. If you want to do those, it's good. But the truth is, an artist who dedicates his or her life to creating paintings is probably needing to sell some to make some money from them. All right, now this is the point where I took the canvas, I turned it to the portrait size, or whatever you call it, portrait way. And see, there was a mistake. See how I did 2 fingers to correct it? I started to stretch it instead of enlarge it. So now I'm enlarging it to fill up the canvas in a way that I like better. It's a better composition this way. There, now she's in place. Now I'm going to sample the color of her jacket and paint it in some more. There we go. I think the rest of the painting is about 5 minutes. I think the rest of it I'm just touching up here and there. I think I'm adding shadows and lights. And yeah, I add a second layer. See that layer right there? On that layer, the reason I did a second layer in the first place is so that I could undo it in case I messed up really bad. But watch what I do. I sampled her skin, and then I took some red to give a little bit more red tone to her skin. To me, it looked like it needed a little bit of rouge, a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of color to it. And you have to pay attention to complexion. Everybody's, especially if you're doing a likeness, everybody's complexion is different, and sometimes the lighting makes things really dramatic. I didn't worry about making this one dramatic. As I mentioned, I just wanted to get a quick demonstration recorded so that I could do this and share it with you. There, I'm adding a little bit of shadow to the bottom of her garment right there, and let's see, I think I add a little bit more shadow to her skin tones. No, that's still her garment. Okay, yeah, just a little bit darker. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. See, now I'm getting the skin tone right there. I'm going to make it a little bit darker and just make it a little bit more of a shadow. Make it smaller. Okay. So hopefully, with the few minutes I have left of this, I just want to say that if this has at all interested you, I would recommend that you watch other artists who have made videos showing how they use Procreate. Just type in Procreate in YouTube and you'll find a bunch of them. And you'll find some that you like and some that you don't like, and some you would like to emulate and some you don't want to emulate. I see a lot of people doing the time-lapse thing. I've done the time-lapse thing a lot myself. By the way, Procreate enables you to have a time-lapse. Like it does it in the background, so you can use it if you want it. Speaking of background, I think that's what I'm doing right now. I added a layer, and I pulled that layer down so it would be behind the woman. And I'm just very, 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 as loose as I can, sketching in a background so that you have a sky, some trees, and some grass in the field behind her. So here's the trees. Now this is an example where it was way too saturated, way too light, way too saturated. Now it's dark but still saturated, and there I move it to the left, so it's less saturated. I think I might even move it more, just to create the illusion that there are trees somewhere behind her. And then the painting will be done in just a couple of minutes. So, all right. Well, thank you for watching. I do have an art site. It is myname.com, larrywhitler.com, If you go there, by the way, I have a virtual gallery. I have 2 of them. If you want to take the time to browse through the art, it's kind of cool. It's made by a company called Kunst Matrix, Kunst Matrix. And Kunst, I learned, is the German word for art. It's a German company, so Kunst Matrix. But if you just go to my site, I'll put it on here so you can see it. All right, there we go. I'm gonna wrap this up in about a half a minute, and then I'll let you go. Okay. All right. Thank you for watching, and thank you for watching the videos that Robin and I make too. This is just kind of an aside, a little extra bonus project I wanted to do, just to answer some of the questions regarding digital art. And there you go. There she is, the woman sipping wine. All right. Bye.